So here's a video about Carla. Carla flipped a fair coin 3 times in a row. So it's a fair coin, meaning there's an equal chance of either side. So we have heads and we have tails. Okay, so we're going to make different ways of showing the sample space. And one way to show it is a list. When you make a list, you are just going to write down all the possible things that can happen, and you usually want to do it in kind of an organized way. So let's pretend like we flipped a coin and we got heads, heads, heads. So that could be like a first possibility. And what I'm going to do is kind of start by like everything heads and then change up what could have happened. So what if I had one tail? Okay. So here's my way of getting all heads. There's heads, heads, heads. Okay, now I want to write, well, what if there was just one tail involved? So I could have heads, heads, tails. I could have heads, tails, heads, or I could have tails, heads, heads, right? So those are all the ways I could get one tail. What if I had two tails? So then I could get heads, tails, tails. I could get tails, heads, tails. Or I could get tails, heads, heads, right? And so those are all the different ways that I can get one head and two tails. Now, what if I want to have 0 heads and all tails? Then I'm going to have tails, tails, tails. So there's a list. That's one way of writing a list, right? And when I wrote it that way, every row on my list was like the number of ways I could do it. So that's one way of writing a list. It's not the only way of writing a list. You could just write them all out, like heads, 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 tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, 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 tails, 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 heads, tails. Like you can just write it like that too. So the way that you write it can be different. You can even do like, see how the way I have this list, everything, it's not all starting with H first. So like I could do where I switch these two guys around and I go heads, tails, tails. And then, wait, what did I just delete? Tails, heads, heads. So I could just like reverse the order of that. That makes sense, right? So list, you're just writing out all the possibilities. There's not just one way to do it, but the more organized you can be, the better.